Hi, I'm Rowena. Last Thanksgiving, my mother smiled sweetly across the table and told everyone my father's money was keeping me comfortable. She said it like a compliment. I was working 2 jobs just to pay rent. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had already seen the bank records. Every single dollar since 2019 was sent to my brother, with my father's signature. That night, when the bank finally called me, they learned whose name was really on the estate. But by then, it was too late to pretend I didn't exist. What would you do if your own family erased you, but kept using your name to build their empire? Let me take you back to the dinner where it all began. Thanksgiving in Houston isn't known for cold weather, but that evening the air had a sharpness to it. Not quite winter, not quite fall. Just that odd, in-between chill that makes your skin crawl before your mind catches up. Inside the house, though, everything was warm. Too warm. The thermostat was cranked up, the turkey smell hung heavy in every room, and the fake warmth of forced conversation circled the table like steam off mashed potatoes. I sat down last. They'd already taken their seats. Mom, Dad, Corbin, and his new fiancée, whatever her name was, plus 2 friends of theirs I didn't recognize. The dining room looked like a Pottery Barn showroom had exploded in there. Gold-rimmed plates, tall candlesticks, and embroidered napkins at every place setting. I glanced down and blinked. Robin. That's what mine said, not Rowena. Not the name I've carried for 36 years. Robin. I let out a little laugh, not loud, not bitter. Just enough to brush it off in front of the table. Looks like I've been renamed. No one noticed, or maybe they did and just decided not to care. I folded the napkin over my lap, carefully hiding the name, like if I couldn't see it, it wouldn't sting so much. Mom chirped over the roasted squash about how nice it was to have the whole family together. Especially now that everyone's doing so well, she said with her syrupy smile. Corbin's business is just booming, and Robin, how's the hospital? I gave her a tight smile. Busy, short-staffed, you know. She didn't, and I wasn't about to explain how I'd just finished a double shift and hadn't slept in 2 days, or how my feet throbbed so bad under the table that I had to unclench my toes inside my flats. Instead, I reached for the gravy boat. My hand brushed against the polished silverware, another family heirloom I'd never be allowed to claim, and passed the bowl to Corbin. He took it like a king receiving tribute, not even a thank you. Everything on that table sparkled except the truth. About halfway through the meal, when the cranberry sauce had started to bleed into the stuffing, Mom tilted her head and smiled across the table. "Sweetheart," she said, placing a soft hand on Dad's wrist, "we're just so glad your father's $7,000 monthly support keeps you comfortable. Really, that's what family's for." The clink of my fork hitting my plate sounded like a gunshot in the silence that followed. My chest tightened. My fingers twitched. $7,000. I looked around, expecting someone to correct her. Maybe Dad would clear his throat and explain the mistake. Maybe Corbin would laugh and say, "Oh, Mom, you mean me, not Ro." But no one said a word. Dad kept chewing, like the sentence hadn't detonated a bomb. Corbin smirked into his wine glass, his thumb slowly rubbing the stem like he was enjoying a private joke. Even the fiancée, Samantha, Serena, froze mid-bite. I opened my mouth trying to find words, but nothing made it past my tongue. I started. Dad cut in sharply, not even looking at me. "Now's not the time to talk finances, Rowena." My name sounded sour in his mouth, like it cost him something to say it right. Someone chuckled, a forced, brittle sound. Then another joined in. Within seconds, the table was filled with light laughter. Except me. My lips curled upward on autopilot. I smiled too. That's what you do, right? You smile when your guts twist into knots. You pretend when your heart sinks to the soles of your feet. You play along because pointing out the lie makes you the problem. I didn't speak again for the rest of the meal. Not when Mom bragged about Corbin's consulting firm. Not when Dad listed the upcoming charity gala they'd be attending. Not even when Samantha Serena asked if I was dating anyone serious. I just nodded when I had to. Took small bites I could barely swallow. My mouth was dry and everything tasted like cardboard. At some point, dessert came and went. I don't even remember what it was. Pumpkin pie, maybe. Pecan, if Dad had his way. But all I could think about was the rent notice on my fridge at home. The overdue utility bills tucked in my purse. The fact that last week I'd counted coins to buy gas. And now I was supposed to be the one getting $7,000 a month? When I finally stood, my chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Every head turned. "I should go," I said softly. Mom blinked. "Already?" "I have an early shift." Dad didn't look up. Corbin gave me a mock salute. I walked out without another word, grabbing my coat from the hallway hook. My napkin, Robin, was still in my hand. Outside, the air had cooled even more. The sky hung low, swollen with clouds but refusing to rain. The scent of burnt sugar lingered, maybe from a neighbor's pie or the crust on Mom's overdone sweet potatoes. It mixed with the bitterness in my throat. I stood on the porch for a moment, alone in the stillness, and whispered to no one, "I've been working double shifts just to pay rent." No one heard it, but it didn't matter. Because I finally had. The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that wraps itself around your shoulders and presses into your chest. I barely remembered the turns I took. Streetlights blinked past, yellow and indifferent. I didn't even bother turning on the radio. My fingers stayed tight around that napkin. Robin. Like it was proof that I hadn't imagined the whole night. It was almost 11 when I pulled into the parking lot outside my apartment. The hallway smelled faintly of someone else's dinner. My key stuck a little in the lock, as usual. I nudged the door open, kicked off my shoes, and dropped my bag by the couch. I didn't bother turning on the main light. Just the small lamp by my desk, the one that flickered slightly if you touched the cord the wrong way. I sat down and opened my laptop. The room was dead quiet, except for the hum of the fridge and the slow ticking of the second-hand clock on the wall. I logged into my bank account, mostly out of spite. Part of me just wanted to prove Mom wrong. Or maybe, deep down, I already knew she wasn't. The statements loaded. There they were, regular monthly deposits, $7,000 each, starting from July 2019. The summer Dad had his stroke. I felt my mouth go dry. My heart thumped, loud enough I could hear it in my ears. But the name on the receiving account, it wasn't mine. I clicked, and clicked again. Double-checked the routing number. My stomach twisted. Corbin's. Every transfer that was supposedly meant for me had been funneled straight into Corbin's account for over 4 years. That's nearly $500,000. I froze, eyes still glued to the screen. I remembered 2019 vividly, sleeping on that stiff recliner in the hospital, spoon-feeding Dad his bland meals, bathing him when Mom couldn't bring herself to do it. I'd used up all my sick days, then unpaid leave, and then picked up night shifts to keep afloat. And all that time, someone had been cashing in on my silence. "They used my name," I whispered. It barely came out louder than a breath. My chest felt tight, like the air had thickened. I stood and walked to the kitchen, made myself a cup of coffee. It sat untouched on the counter while I paced the room, memory after memory crashing into me. Corbin, showing up late to hospital visits in designer loafers, joking about Dad's tough skin. Bragging later about investments that were finally paying off. Me, brushing it off as dumb luck or just plain arrogance. I sat back down and dug through my folders. The old, dusty ones I hadn't looked at since the stroke. That's when I found it. The temporary estate transfer form. My name, his, Dad's. Signed during one of those long, exhausting nights when I would have done anything just to go home and sleep. Dad had said it was just to make paying bills easier while he was recovering. Mom nodded along, saying I was so helpful, so responsible. I hadn't even read the fine print. I'd signed my rights away. Not permanently, but enough for them to twist the knife. The betrayal sat heavy on my shoulders. I picked up my phone, called Dad, straight to voicemail, called Mom. No answer. I hesitated, then tapped out a message to Corbin. Hey, can you explain why Dad's support checks have been going to you? 3 dots blinked on the screen. Then his reply came through. He said it was easier that way. Don't make it weird, Ro. I stared at those words, every syllable feeling like a slap. Don't make it weird, like I was the one overreacting. I set the phone down slowly. My breath was calm, too calm. That kind of stillness that happens when you're no longer shocked. Just done. They thought I wouldn't notice, or worse, they knew I might, and assumed I'd do nothing anyway. I opened my notes app, typed a single line. If they think I'm invisible, they've mistaken my silence for weakness. The napkin sat beside me, folded neatly like it had come straight from the table. Robin, not Rowena, not even close. I picked it up and looked at it for a long time before whispering, "They don't even know my name." I waited 3 days, not because I needed more proof, I already had it, but because I knew walking into that house too angry would let them frame me as emotional or unstable. I needed to be sharp, measured. The Rowena they remembered didn't make noise. She kept the peace, took the blame, smiled when spoken over. I'd let them see that Rowena again until it was too late to stop the new one. By mid-morning, I was pulling into the circular driveway of the Thatcher estate. The oak trees that lined it looked like they'd been cut with rulers, not a leaf out of place. I parked beside Corbin's new SUV, another business write-off, I was sure, and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was loud. Inside, everything smelled the same as always. Lemon polish, old wood, money. The kind of scent that tells you not to touch anything unless you're paying the mortgage. The door opened before I could knock. Mom stood there in a cream blouse, her smile a little too wide. "Sweetheart, you didn't have to come," she said, as though I'd shown up uninvited to a country club lunch. "I wanted to clear something up," I said. Just that. Her smile barely flickered, but I saw the hesitation behind her eyes. She stepped aside. I walked in, folder in hand. No hugs, no small talk. I followed the sound of classical music drifting faintly from the living room and waited. Dad appeared a few minutes later, adjusting his glasses like he always did when he was preparing to lie. "If this is about Thanksgiving," he began, "let's not ruin another day, shall we?" "I don't plan to," I said, setting my folder gently on the coffee table. "I just need clarification." He didn't sit, neither did I. "I went through 4 years of bank statements," I said, my voice steady. "Every one of those support payments, they went into Corbin's account." The air seemed to still. "I know what I saw." He cleared his throat. "That's because Corbin manages the family funds. It's more efficient. We agreed on this years ago. You've never been good with money, Ro." That old line again. Mom had stepped into the room at some point. She perched on the edge of the love seat like a guest in her own house. "You work too hard, sweetheart. It's better this way, less for you to worry about." Better for who? I kept my face blank. The kind of expression I used to wear during tough shifts at the hospital, when families were breaking down and everyone was waiting for someone to lose it. "That's not how it was explained to me," I said calmly, opening the folder, neatly printed, highlighted, labeled. Corbin strolled in mid-conversation, holding a mug like this was some kind of morning chat over pancakes. "Hey, Ro, what's up?" His casual tone made me want to throw the mug across the room, but I didn't. "You got all of it," I said. He blinked. "What are you talking about?" "The money, the checks, every month since 2019. He glanced at Dad, then back at me. "It's how he wanted it set up. Don't look at me. I'm just helping out." "Helping yourself, you mean?" Mom shifted. "Rowena, we're not here to fight." "No," I agreed. "We're here to clarify." Dad moved closer, resting one hand on the fireplace mantel. "There's no need to escalate. This arrangement has worked for years. For you." He didn't deny it. I started gathering my papers. "Then I'll just have the bank confirm the arrangement in writing." A beat passed. "That's not necessary," Dad said. His tone had dropped slightly, more warning than suggestion. "It is for me," I said, sliding the last page into place. Corbin gave a small laugh, short and sharp. "Come on, Ro, you're making this dramatic. Dad's got everything under control." I looked at him, really looked, at the soft jawline that had never tightened with stress, at the hands that never blistered from long shifts or midnight feedings, at the man who walked through life like it owed him a shortcut. "That's what you said when I took care of him after his stroke," I said. "Remember who made the meals you ate?" His smile twitched. No response. Mom's voice cut in, soft but sharp. "You're being ungrateful." Ungrateful. That word hung in the room like smoke. I stepped back, keeping my expression neutral. "I'll be in touch." I didn't give them time to respond. Outside, the air was bright but cold. My fingers were trembling by the time I reached the car. Not from fear, from adrenaline. I slid into the driver's seat and opened the glove box, pulling out the document I'd nearly forgotten, the 2019 transfer. Signed, sealed. My name, faint but still there. They hadn't erased me. Not yet. I smiled, small and hard, whispering to no one. Good. They forgot to erase me. The morning light hit my rearview mirror as I left the quiet streets of my apartment behind. I didn't press the radio. There was nothing to say. I parked in front of the Gulf National Bank building, its glass doors clean, its marble facade the kind of architecture built to project trust. I took a breath, smoothed my blouse, and walked in. It was 10 a.m., just as the lobby was starting to fill with weekday routine. An elderly couple holding hands, a young father with a toddler on his shoulders, clerks greeting clients like they were family, or at least friendly enough. I held my manila folder close. I felt the guard's eyes on me, polite but observant. I had been here before. This time, I wasn't just a depositor. I was a truth seeker. "Rowena, it's been years. How's your father?" Vera Lansing greeted me in her office, behind glass panels that reflected both the room and the corridor beyond. She seemed pleased to see me. I nodded. "Still managing," I said, with a half-smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. She offered a seat. I declined and stood by the window, folder still in hand. We spoke of light things: Thanksgiving dinner, the hospital, my shifts. But beneath it all, I felt the current humming, the questions I had, the truth I had discovered. I placed the folder on her desk with deliberate calm. "Vera," I began, "I found some bank transfers that raise questions." She leaned in, looking down at the printouts. "Transfers under your name," she said quietly, "but redirected to a trust linked to Corbin Thatcher." My breath caught, but I held steady. Could someone do that without authorization? She held my gaze. "Only if they had joint signatory rights, which your father was listed with." The room chilled. I gripped the folder's edge, nails pressing against the cardboard, feeling the weight of what was unfolding. Vera adjusted her glasses, hesitated, then continued. "And your estate records? They're still under your name." Corbin never updated that. Maybe he didn't even know. I looked up. 4 years of payments, my sacrifice, my invisible labor. And the paperwork said I had rights. They just didn't let me know. So, I still legally hold the property? Vera nodded. Technically, yes, unless someone files a claim. A silent shift inside me. Not victory, not yet. But something had changed. We sat in quiet for a moment. I glanced out the window. Traffic moved, people walked by oblivious, and I felt the walls of lies closing in on those who had built them. When I turned back to her, she was speaking again. I shouldn't say this, she said, voice low, but if anything happens, if you feel pressured, threatened, call me directly. I've seen too many families like yours. Her words weren't dramatic, but they landed like a slow-moving bomb. I nodded. Thank you. I'm not trying to destroy anyone. I just want the truth to stay intact. Vera offered a slight smile. Then keep everything documented. People forget. Paper doesn't. I left her office feeling steadier than I had in a long time. My footsteps echoed a little too loud on the marble floor as I crossed the lobby. As I passed a digital display above the bank entrance, big letters reading Trust, Security, Legacy. I laughed quietly to myself. Irony never sounded so hollow. Back in my car, the engine humming softly, I opened my notebook on the passenger seat and wrote, "They built a lie with my name. I'll end it with theirs." I smoothed the napkin folded beside it, the one that read, Robin, and pressed it into the book. That cloth was a quiet reminder of what had been taken and what was about to be returned. The drive home passed in motion. Headlights trailed like distant memories. I felt calm in a new way, not at peace, but poised. The truth felt like a tool I could hold. I sat among the loose sheets, a low lamp casting long shadows across the coffee-stained carpet. Statements, letters, charity board minutes, faded photographs, all of them spread out like evidence of a life I had lived in borrowed belief. My apartment felt smaller than ever, the walls closing in with everything I had carried quietly for years. I pulled another sheet toward me and read the routing number one more time. Same as Corbin's account. Every month. From 2019. Hair pulled into a knot at the back of my head, eyes bleary. I traced a circle on the floor, a half-empty mug by my side. I whispered the sentence out loud. It's like I was the ghost that kept the lights on. No one turned the switch, but I did the wiring. No one called the furloughs, but I picked up the slack. No one thanked me, but I expected none. My shoulders sagged. The line between exhaustion and acceptance blurred. I closed my eyes for a moment, remembered nights on the hospital floor, the fluorescent glare of the ER. Remembered Dad lying pale, breathing heavy, while I stayed awake on a recliner. They said I was so helpful, never so needed. That phrasing now struck me as a quiet dismissal. A way to say, you're valuable, just don't ask for recognition. I stood and toured the apartment, slow steps. The walls cracked in places, the lamp flickered. Dishes from takeout sat in the sink. The throw blanket looked tired. I paused in front of an old photo. Dad in his hospital gown, me smiling with a cup of soup, Corbin absent. I zoomed in, his wristwatch, the one he always wore. The date on the photo, June 12, 2019. 2 months before the official transfer of authority, Dad claimed he signed when he was healthy enough. My pulse jumped. I pulled out my phone, checked metadata. June 12th, 14th floor hospital room. He signed temporarily while I arranged his affairs. Then came the permanent document after he recovered. Same watch, the same hand. They backdated the papers. The betrayal turned cold. Betrayal is one thing, but deliberate manipulation is something else entirely. I sank to the floor, the folder still on my lap, a lump in my throat. They had used me. Not simply ignored me, they had harnessed me. The finances, the estate, the polished dinner evenings, they were built on top of my sacrifice and my silence. My phone vibrated. A reminder. I tapped into contacts. Vera. I sat up, cold determination lacing through my veins. I called. Vera, I said, voice steady. I need to send you a photo. The watch. It's proof the document's date was forged. Her pause stretched long. Then she answered, Send it. Quietly. Don't let anyone know you're looking yet. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I won't. Not yet. As I hung up, I felt tears press behind my lids. Not sadness exactly, but release. I whispered to the room, You taught me to keep receipts, so I did. The napkin lay folded beside me, the one from that dinner. Robin stitched in pale thread. I leaned forward and opened a blank binder I had bought earlier, its label already written, Truth. I slid in the statements, the photo, the metadata files. My phone showed 5 missed calls. Mom, Dad, Mom, again. I stared, their names blurred, a pattern I had accepted for too long. I didn't answer. Finally, I uncapped a pen and wrote in my journal, I won't shout, I'll show. I set the pen down, leaned back. The binders, the mess, the cold night air outside my window, all of it came together into a moment of reckoning, the quiet understanding that I had enough. Inside, I felt an ember glow, not vengeance, but resolve. I had been soft before, patient to a fault, but patience without strategy is surrender. I closed the binder and locked the folder on my laptop. Tomorrow could wait. Tonight I would rest, but rest with purpose. As I switched off the lamp and slipped under my blanket, I thought, this is the pivot, the moment I stop carrying their narrative and start holding one of my own. I drifted off with the napkin pressed beside my pillow, its embroidered robin no longer an insult, but a silent warning. Morning light filtered through the gray skies over downtown Houston as I pulled into the parking garage of Samuel Pierce's law office. The parking ticket in my hand felt heavier than usual, like the entry pass into a world I'd waited far too long to enter. Inside the lobby, wood paneling and old leather chairs welcomed me with quiet formality. I smoothed the edge of my folder and walked in. His office was on the 3rd floor. I didn't ask for directions, I'd found it before. Bookshelves lined 2 walls, volumes titled Trusts and Estates, Corporate Governance, Worn Edges from Countless Use. On one wall, a plaque, Paper is Power. I nodded to myself. I had the evidence. Now I needed the strategy. Samuel Pierce offered his hand when I entered. He was mid-40s, salt and pepper hair, sharp suit, calm presence. He motioned toward a chair. Rowena, thank you for coming in. I slid my bag onto the floor and placed the folder on the desk. He deferred opening it, giving me a moment. I let him. This, he said, leaning forward and tapping a printout. My father's watch visible on the photo, clear metadata beside it, could change everything. It's time-stamped before the notarized date. I nodded. So they forged the transfer. They altered history, he replied, his voice low. Subtly. That's worse. I leaned back and absorbed his words. I've been strong enough to care for others, strong enough to carry burdens unspoken, but I had never been strong enough to defend myself until now. He opened the folder then and pulled out another set of documents. Bank transfers, trust records, routing numbers. This transaction trail, he said, shows your name as beneficiary, but the funds routed to a trust in your brother's name. The estate records on file still list you, R. Thatcher, as principal. It didn't get updated. Someone assumed you wouldn't notice. My pulse skipped. A discovery like that lifts you momentarily before the weight of it settles in. I took a breath. What do we do? Samuel smiled lightly. We move quietly. We file an intent to audit, not a lawsuit yet. It freezes any outgoing assets from the estate until the investigation concludes. Will they know? I asked. Eventually, he said, but not today, not yet. Right now you control when the curtain opens. I swallowed. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about precision. I didn't need theatrics. I needed leverage. He handed me a business card. I'll begin the paperwork. You provide me the files, the signatures, the photo, everything. I'll file by Friday. On Monday, we launch. Outside his office, I sat in my car, the folder open beside me. A line I wrote earlier rose to the surface. They wanted a silent daughter. Now they'll get silence, just not the kind they wanted. I typed it into notes, then tapped save. That night, I drafted an email to Vera Lansing. Subject: Request for transaction logs. Roe Thatcher. Body: Please forward all items referenced in our meeting. Rowena Thatcher. I sent it before midnight. Then I sat in the darkness of my living room. The binder labeled Truth sat on the coffee table. I closed my eyes. The weight of what I carried changed shape. It was no longer shame. It was armor. On Tuesday afternoon, I heard the phone ring. It was Samuel's office. Rowena, the notice is filed. The audit is in effect. They won't know just yet. They'll see the freeze when funds don't move. I inhaled. So this begins? Yes, he said. And you're ready. On Thursday evening, I got an automated email. Sender: Gulf National Bank. Subject: Notice of estate hold. Initiated by beneficiary R. Thatcher. My initials. I stared until the screen blurred. My breath came in shallow waves. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. I didn't celebrate. I shut the laptop, stood in the window of my apartment, and looked out at the gray Houston skyline. Cars crawled below. Afternoon rush hours, lives happening unaware. I whispered, "The truth doesn't need to shout." And I meant it. The next morning brought an unnerving quiet. I sat at my kitchen table, the dawn light creeping in, but doing nothing to soften the tension in the air. I'd barely slept. The night was filled with more thoughts than rest. All those files in the binder, the napkin with the misspelled name, the bank notice, it all felt heavy. And now, at 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find Mom standing there, pumpkin pie in hand. Her blouse was exactly the kind she wore when everything is fine, the pale yellow reminder of happier holidays. I recognized the gesture. The smile she offered followed the script. "I thought you might not be eating properly." "You can come in, Mom," I said, stepping aside. The smell of baked apples and cinnamon trailed behind her as she walked in. The air felt thick, rehearsed, like we were actors in someone else's choreography. She set the pie on the table before me. I didn't move to cut it. She took off her coat and sat down, her posture perfect, her expression expectant. "You've caused quite a stir, Rowan," she began, using the wrong name on purpose. "Your father's worried sick. Corbin's been humiliated." I raised an eyebrow. The word gurgled in the silence. "Humiliated or discovered?" I asked softly. Mom sighed, and for a second she looked tired, not for the sake of acting, but real exhaustion. "It's not about blame, Rowena. Families don't sue each other. You're breaking us apart." The words felt cold. They weren't accusations, but they cut just the same. I held the silence, tasting it. "You broke me apart long before I filed anything," I replied, quiet but clear. She blinked. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second. I had waited for that moment a long time. She looked at me with something I recognized, surprise. Not at what I'd said, but at the tone I used, the tone she'd never heard. "You've always been so difficult to please," she said in a gentler voice. "We tried our best." "No, Mom," I said. the faintest smile touching my lips. I was just easy to ignore. She exhaled. The pivot was subtle, the calm before the fall. We both felt it. The pie sat untouched. Nothing moved in the kitchen but the air. Mom leaned forward. Her voice softened. "You think this will make you happy? Taking from your own family?" She tilted the pie box toward me. "We all want peace." "I'm not taking, Mom," I said. "I'm just reclaiming what already had my name on it." She looked around the room then, my apartment, my modest furniture, the worn rug beneath the coffee table, the files stacked neatly and the napkin resting in plain sight. The walls weren't polished. They were real. She frowned, her lips pressed in a thin line. "You've made your point," she said after a moment. "Stop before this gets uglier." "It's already ugly," I answered quietly, leaning back in my chair. My voice was calm, and I let her see it. "You just preferred it when I smiled through it." She pulled herself upright, her expression set. She stood, gathered the pie box, and placed it on my countertop. "I'll come by later." Her voice cracked, though. Maybe she knew what was coming. I watched her walk to the door. She paused before stepping out. The morning light caught in her eyes, not pity, not defiance, but something else. Regret, perhaps, but thinner than that. I whispered to myself as the door clicked shut. Sweetness only covers rot for so long. Then I walked into the kitchen, opened the trash can, and dropped the pie inside. The box hit the sides, crumpled. I didn't watch it fall. I just looked away, and when I turned back, the box was gone. Gone with my old life of platitudes and polite dismissals. I sat down again, not sure if I felt victory or relief. Perhaps both. I flipped open my journal and wrote, "Today I stopped being the daughter who felt guilty for existing. Now I exist for something more than approval." I closed the cover, picked up my phone, and left it face down on the table so I wouldn't swipe through every message looking for, "Are you okay?" I drank water slowly. I didn't want to rush into what was next, but I knew I would. Because this moment wasn't about confrontation, it was about truth. And I'd let enough of their narrative dictate my life. I glanced at the napkin, the one with robins stitched in pale thread. I picked it up, rubbed my thumb over the letters, and thought of all the Thanksgiving dinners, hospitals, late shifts, and silent nights. I remembered how invisible I'd felt, and I realized something. I was visible now. As the morning stretched into afternoon, I walked to the window and watched the cars pass. People were moving through their lives, oblivious to what I was orchestrating behind closed doors. Once again, the world moved on. But this time I wasn't a bystander. I stood and walked to my bookshelf, retrieved a small box labeled Receipts, and placed it beside the binder. It was time to gather everything: emails, metadata, dinner invitations, stash of bank statements. Evidence becomes truth when someone else reads it. My phone buzzed, a message from Corbin. "Call me." I ignored it. Another from Dad. "We need to talk." I didn't reply. For the first time, I noticed how much power lies in silence. Late in the day, I made myself dinner. Something simple: roasted vegetables, a piece of fish, water. No celebratory wine. I didn't feel like celebrating, but I allowed myself fullness without guilt. This was different from hiding in plain sight. When I finally crawled into bed, the weight of the day settled, but instead of crushing me, it felt grounded. I had choices. They were scrambling now. The first wave of panic would come. I welcomed it. When I woke the next morning, the sky was the color of pewter, flat, cold, and deliberate. I made coffee, black and unhurried, and opened my inbox. There it was. Subject line: family meeting, no lawyers. 4 p.m. Be civil. Dad never wasted words. He didn't need to. His brevity was its own intimidation. I stared at it for a full minute before replying with just one line: "I'll be there." By 3:30, I was driving through the long driveway that led to the Thatcher estate. The oaks lining the road stood bare, their branches like crooked fingers reaching toward the sky. It was the same house I grew up in, the same windows where I used to press my face as a child, waiting for someone to say I'd done enough. Now I wasn't waiting for anyone. The boardroom was just as I remembered it. Polished walnut, heavy curtains, and the faint scent of cigar smoke embedded in the fabric of power. Every major family decision had happened here. Every exclusion, too. Dad was already seated at the head of the table, his posture commanding, his silver watch glinting under the low winter light. Corbin sat 2 chairs down, arms crossed, jaw tight. Mom hovered near the sideboard, pretending to fix the coffee tray. Her silence was her weapon, the same as always. Dad didn't bother with greetings. "You've gone too far, Rowena," he said evenly. I set my leather binder on the table. "Not yet." His eyes narrowed, that same controlled fury that once made me fold in every argument. But not this time. I opened the binder with slow precision. "You're destroying everything your family built," he continued, his tone rising just slightly. "Do you have any idea how this looks? The audits, the banks calling, your brother's accounts frozen? This is disgraceful." I didn't look at Corbin. I looked straight at Dad. "You mean it's visible now?" I took out the first set of papers, copies of wire transfers, routing numbers, and notes from the estate fund. I laid them down one by one, neat as surgical instruments. Then, the photograph. Him, frail but conscious, wearing that same watch. "You signed the transfer 2 months before it was dated," I said quietly. His eyes flicked to the photo, then away. "You don't know what you're talking about." I slid another sheet across the table. Metadata, timestamps, location tags. "The camera did." The silence that followed was sharp enough to hear the hum of the air vent. Corbin shifted in his seat, his leg bouncing under the table. Mom's hand trembled slightly as she set down a cup. I continued, voice steady. "You used my name to funnel funds into Corbin's account. Every tax document shows R. Thatcher as the legal beneficiary, but the deposits, those never reached me. You turned my identity into a shield for your transactions." Dad's knuckles whitened against the table edge. "You don't understand how business works." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You used family as cover. You built your empire on my silence." Corbin finally exploded. "Dad said you didn't care about the inheritance. You left us to handle it." I turned toward him slowly. "I cared about honesty. You turned it into humiliation." He looked down, his face flushing red. For once, Dad didn't defend him. The control in his expression cracked, a single line running through years of authority. "Do you think you can ruin me?" he said finally, standing now, his hand slamming down hard on the table. The sound echoed through the room. I didn't flinch. "You did that yourself," I said, meeting his eyes. "When you made your daughter your scapegoat." I reached into my bag and placed a small sealed envelope in front of him. "That's a copy of the estate hold request. If you think I'm bluffing, call your bank." For a second, no one moved. Then Corbin pulled out his phone, dialed, waited. His breathing grew shallow. "Dad, it's true. The accounts are still locked." The air left the room. Dad sank back into his chair, the weight of realization pressing into him like gravity. The man who built his entire life on control was finally confronted with something he couldn't command: evidence. "I'm not here to ruin you," I said, standing now, gathering my binder. "I'm here to end being the invisible one." My mother's eyes followed me to the door. Her lips trembled, a mix of fear and something else, perhaps the faint recognition that this moment had been inevitable. "Rowena, please," she said softly. I turned halfway, hand on the doorframe. "You raised me to stay quiet," I said. "You never taught me what happens when I stop." And then I left. Outside, the cold hit like a clean slap. The winter sun was dipping behind the estate, painting the windows gold. I walked to my car, my heels clicking against the marble steps, steady and unhurried. Behind me, the house loomed, grand, imposing, but suddenly smaller than I remembered. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the engine. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked calm, not triumphant, just free. As I drove away, I thought about how power changes hands, not with shouting, but with proof. The binder sat on the passenger seat, buckled in like a silent witness. The truth had finally been spoken, and it didn't need to shout. I pulled into my parking space just as the sun dipped behind the skyline. The binder was still beside me, still buckled in like a passenger I hadn't quite dropped off. I sat there for a minute, engine humming, the warmth of the heater tracing my fingers. I didn't feel triumphant, just leveled, as if all the noise that once filled my body had finally stepped outside for air. By the time I walked into the apartment, the light had shifted into that soft winter gray, the kind that makes every object cast a longer shadow than usual. I made tea without thinking, muscle memory, and curled up on the couch, blanket over my knees. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't scanning emails, checking statements, or hunting for signatures. I was just still. The next morning came quiet. Frost edged the bottom corners of my window pane. I hadn't set an alarm, but I was up anyway, body clock trained by years of early meetings and tension. My phone buzzed once. I glanced at the screen. Bank of Houston. I answered. "Ms. Thatcher," said the voice on the other end, polite and crisp. "As of this morning, full ownership of the estate has been restored under your name. Would you like to make any transfers at this time?" I stared at the floor. "No," I said slowly. "Not yet." "Very well," the voice replied. "Have a good day." I ended the call and just stood there, barefoot on cold tile, the silence pressing in. I wasn't sure what I thought I'd feel. I didn't cry, I didn't smile, I just breathed. The estate, the name, the legal weight, the history, all of it was mine now. Not out of favor, not gifted, reclaimed. I walked to the window. Below, the city was already alive, horns, footsteps, small hurried lives, threading between lights and crosswalks. For the first time in years, I felt like I could blend in again. Just another woman in a robe holding coffee, watching a world that didn't owe her anything. That night, I started sorting through an old drawer I hadn't opened in ages, the kind filled with random cords, expired coupons, broken pens. At the bottom, stuck to the corner, was a photograph I didn't remember keeping. A Thanksgiving years ago. Everyone was there, Dad at the head, carving the turkey like it was a performance. Mom in pearls, smiling like a catalog ad. Corbin raising his wine glass with that easy, confident smirk. And me. Off to the side, half out of frame, blurred. I held the photo closer, squinting at my younger self. I looked happy, or maybe just trying to be. I slid the picture back inside the envelope and tucked it under a file marked Old Papers. Then I saw it, tucked beneath a stack of unused cards. A napkin, folded perfectly, still shaped like a maple leaf. The same one my mother had placed in front of me that night, her way of adding holiday charm to tension disguised as dinner. I held it gently. It had survived all the moves, the boxes, the chaos. I couldn't remember why I took it, only that I had. "I kept this," I whispered to the quiet, so I wouldn't forget how it felt to be small. And in that moment, I didn't hate the memory. I didn't want to set it on fire. I just wanted it to rest where it belonged, with the truth, not the fantasy. I refolded the napkin carefully and slid it into a folder I labeled closure. I sealed it. Didn't even look back. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. A new message from Corbin's subject. You won. I hope you're happy. I stared at the screen for a moment. My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I didn't win. I ended it. There's a difference. Then I paused, reread it, deleted it. He didn't deserve that answer. The silence was enough. Instead, I opened my notebook, pages now half filled with dates, notes, and one-liners I wrote to hold myself together, and scribbled something across the next clean page. Peace isn't revenge. It's when they can't reach you anymore. And that was it. I stepped onto the balcony, the city wrapped in pre-dawn stillness. Cold air pressed into my skin, sharp but honest. Below, cars began inching through traffic. Dogs tugged at their leashes. Strangers stood in line for coffee. None of them knew my name. None of them cared what I'd just come through. It was perfect. I whispered to the wind, letting the breath trail with the sound. I don't need them to see me anymore. I see myself. And for once, I believed it.